They called Zoe Hart a killer's accomplice before the victim's blood had dried. The plus-size court sketch artist had spent years drawing other people's lies for the public record. But when the lights failed during a Mafia hearing, she saw something no camera caught. A face reflected in polished brass. She drew it. Then someone planted the knife in her sketch case. Someone erased the security footage, and someone convinced Matteo Rinaldi that Zoe had sent a coded message to the man who murdered the witness. He watched her get dragged into a cell without stopping it. What Matteo did not know was that Zoe's final sketch contained 3 details no innocent man would fear: a wolf ring, a burned fingertip, and a reflection from the exact 12 seconds the courtroom went dark. The question was whether she could survive long enough to prove the man she drew was standing beside Matteo all along. Zoe Hart had drawn guilt before. She had drawn it in clenched jaws, trembling hands, and eyes that refused to look at the jury. She had drawn it on wealthy faces and desperate ones, on politicians, police officers, and men whose last names made the courtroom go quiet. But on the morning Miles Kerr took the witness stand, Zoe drew fear. The courtroom in Belmont County had no cameras. The judge had forbidden them, so Zoe sat in the press row with a black portfolio across her lap, recording the scene in charcoal for the evening papers. Miles Kerr was a thin man in a gray suit, a former accountant for the Rinaldi shipping empire. He had agreed to testify about payments that had disappeared through shell companies and into the hands of city officials. At the defense table sat Matteo Rinaldi. He wore a dark suit, his expression calm enough to make the room uncomfortable. People called him a mafia boss behind closed doors. In public, he was a businessman with lawyers, charity galas, and 1,000 ways to make trouble vanish. Zoe had sketched Matteo before. He never fidgeted, never raised his voice, never seemed afraid. That morning, he looked at Miles Kerr as if he were trying to decide whether the man was a threat or a trap. Beside him sat Adrian Vale, Matteo's chief legal advisor. Adrian was polished where Matteo was quiet. His silver hair was perfectly combed. His tie was a shade too expensive. When he spoke, judges listened because he made every sentence sound reasonable. Miles wiped his palms against his trousers. The transfers were not approved through standard accounts, he said. They were routed through entities created by... He stopped. Zoe followed his gaze, not toward Matteo, toward the side door near the bailiff's desk. A uniformed court officer stood there with his back half turned, ordinary height, ordinary posture. But something about him felt wrong. His shoes were too clean for courthouse security. His shoulders were too rigid. Zoe began sketching him. The man shifted as the morning sun struck the brass nameplate on the bailiff's desk. For a heartbeat, his face appeared in the reflection. Not clearly, just enough. A hard jaw, a scar near the thumb, a heavy ring shaped like a wolf's head. Zoe pressed charcoal harder into the page. Then the courtroom lights went out. Someone screamed. 12 seconds passed in darkness. When the lights returned, Miles Kerr was slumped forward over the witness stand. Blood spread across his gray shirt, a knife was buried beneath his ribs, and the officer by the side door was gone. For one terrible second, nobody moved. Then the courtroom exploded into noise. The bailiff shouted for everyone to stay seated. Chairs scraped against the floor. Someone near the jury box began to cry. A deputy rushed toward Miles Kerr, but one look at the blood spreading across his shirt told Zoe the man was beyond help. Zoe held her sketch pad against her chest. Her fingers were black with charcoal. Her heart beat so hard she could hear it. Across the room, Matteo Rinaldi had risen from his chair. He was not shouting. He was not panicking. But his eyes had locked onto the empty side door where the false court officer had stood. Adrian Vale was already moving. "Seal every exit," he told the bailiff. "No one leaves this room until the police arrive." The command came too easily. Zoe watched him. His suit was immaculate. His hands were steady. But as he turned toward the witness stand, sunlight struck the ring on his right hand. Not a wolf, a plain gold band. Still, Zoe had seen the reflection. She had seen a wolf's head carved into metal and a thick scar crossing the killer's thumb. She lowered her eyes and began to draw. Not the blood, not Miles's body. The hand, the curve of the knuckles, the wolf ring, the thumb scar. Then the hard line of the man's jaw as it had appeared in the brass nameplate. A shadow fell over her page. "You saw something?" a voice asked. Zoe looked up. A young court officer stood beside her. He was pale, sweat shining at his hairline. His badge read Officer Bennett. "I saw a man by the side door," Zoe said quietly. "He wasn't supposed to be there." Bennett swallowed. "What did he look like?" Zoe tilted the sketch pad so only he could see. The officer's eyes widened. "You know him," she whispered. Before he could answer, Adrian's voice cut through the room. "Officer Bennett. Join the security team at the rear entrance." Bennett flinched. "Yes, sir." He stepped away too quickly, but not before Zoe saw his hand slip into his pocket. He had taken a photo of her sketch. A few minutes later, the first detectives arrived. They questioned everyone in the courtroom. They took names, searched bags, photographed the scene. Zoe tried to tell a detective about the false court officer, but Adrian interrupted before she could finish. "Miss Hart has been under considerable pressure," he said smoothly. She was seated close to the incident. "I saw him before the lights went out," Zoe said. "And did you see him attack Mr. Kerr?" "No." Adrian gave the detective a sympathetic look. Zoe's stomach tightened. Then another officer approached her with a sealed evidence bag. Inside was a knife. The handle was smeared with blood, and beside it, caught in the ridges of the grip, was a dark streak of charcoal. "Mrs. Hart," the detective said, "we need you to come with us." Zoe stared at the evidence bag. The charcoal looked like hers, but the shade was wrong. The detectives took Zoe into a witness room on the second floor. They did not call it an interrogation. They offered water. They spoke softly. But the door locked from the outside, and the knife in the evidence bag sat on the table where she could not stop looking at it. Detective Marla Quinn opened a notebook. "You were seated close to Mr. Kerr," she said. "You passed something to Officer Bennett after the murder. A sketch. What kind of sketch?" "The man I saw before the lights went out." Quinn watched her carefully. "Officer Bennett says you gave him instructions." Zoe stared. "That is a lie. He says you told him where to meet someone after court. I told him he was in danger." The detective's expression changed slightly. "Why?" "Because he knew the man in my drawing." Quinn leaned back. "And who was that?" Zoe hesitated. Adrian Vale's face moved through her mind. Calm hands, careful voice. The way he had ordered Bennett away before the officer could say a word. "I don't know yet," she said, "but it is someone with access to this building." The door opened. Officer Bennett stood in the hallway with another deputy beside him. His face was even paler than before. "Ms. Hart," he said, "could I see the sketch again?" Quinn looked between them. "Briefly." Zoe took out her sketch pad. The original drawing lay beneath several courtroom studies. She had drawn the wolf ring larger now, adding the angle of the thumb scar and the narrow sleeve seam of the false officer's uniform. Bennett's breathing changed. "You've seen this ring," Zoe whispered. He nodded once. "Where?" Before he could answer, Adrian Vale appeared at the end of the hall. His smile was polite. "Detective Quinn," he said. "The judge is asking for a full chain of custody review. I'm afraid Officer Bennett must return to the security office." Bennett froze. Zoe saw panic in his eyes. Real panic, not guilt. As Adrian turned to speak with Quinn, Zoe tore a small corner from the drawing. On it, she had sketched only the wolf ring and the scarred thumb. She pressed it into Bennett's palm. "Don't go to security," she whispered. "Find the public records desks. Ask for the blue file on Vale." Bennett closed his fingers around the paper. Then Adrian looked back. "What was that?" he asked. "Nothing," Bennett said too fast. Adrian's eyes settled on Zoe. For a moment, the hallway seemed to go still. Then he smiled again. 10 minutes later, Detective Quinn returned with a new piece of evidence, a security video. It showed Zoe in the courtroom during the blackout, standing near the witness box with something in her hand. The image was grainy, but clear enough to suggest she had placed the knife beneath Miles Kerr's seat. Zoe watched the footage once, then again. "It's edited," she said. Quinn folded her arms. "How can you tell?" "The light." "What about it?" "The blackout lasted 12 seconds. In this video, the emergency lights are already on when I stand up." Quinn looked at the screen. Before she could answer, a uniformed officer entered carrying Zoe's sketch portfolio. "We found this in the press room," he said. Inside was a typed note. "Meet after the lights fail. Bring the knife." Quinn's expression hardened. Zoe knew then that Adrian had not just framed her. He had built the frame before Miles Kerr ever entered the courtroom. And somewhere inside the courthouse, Officer Bennett was walking alone with a drawing that could get him killed. They took Zoe downstairs in handcuffs. The holding cells beneath Belmont Courthouse smelled of concrete dust, old coffee, and fear. A narrow strip of fluorescent light buzzed overhead. Through the bars, Zoe could see a row of empty benches and the locked door leading to the transport corridor. The detective removed her cuffs only after the cell door closed. "Your arraignment is at 8 tomorrow morning," Marla Quinn said. "Until then, do not make this harder on yourself." Zoe almost laughed, as if she had built the knife, the footage, the note, and the trap waiting above her. Instead, she sat on the metal cot and rubbed her wrists. They had taken her sketch pad, her charcoal kit, her phone, even the silver hair clip her mother had given her. But they had missed one thing. Before the detective searched her, Zoe had slipped the original drawing beneath the inner seam of her coat hem. The paper was folded small enough to disappear beside the stitching. She pulled it free now. The charcoal lines were blurred at the edges, but the details remained. The wolf ring, the scarred thumb, the jaw in the brass reflection. Zoe studied the sketch under the hard cell light. The ring had a tiny notch near the wolf's ear. It was not decorative. It looked like a break in the metal, as if someone had struck it against something hard. A door opened down the hall. 2 pairs of polished shoes crossed the concrete. Matteo Rinaldi stopped outside her cell. Adrian Vale stood beside him. Zoe rose slowly. For a moment, Matteo said nothing. His gaze moved over the cramped cell, the metal cot, and Zoe's wrists. Something tightened in his face, but Adrian spoke before it could become anything useful. "The police have the video," Adrian said. "They have the weapon. They have the note in her portfolio. They have a story," Zoe replied. "That is not the same thing as truth." Matteo looked at her. "Did you pass Officer Bennett instructions?" "I passed him a warning." "Why?" "Because he recognized the man I drew." Adrian's voice stayed gentle. "Zoe, no one wants this to be true. But Mr. Kerr was about to expose people inside Matteo's organization. You had access to the courtroom. You had an opportunity." "And a reason?" Zoe asked. The question hung there. Matteo's silence hurt more than Adrian's accusation. Zoe had once refused a newspaper editor who offered her $20,000 for private sketches of Matteo during a sealed hearing. She had refused because a courtroom artist recorded history. She did not sell pieces of it to whoever paid more. Matteo knew that. He had personally sent word of thanks through Adrian. Now he looked at her as though that woman had never existed. "The evidence will decide," Matteo said. "No," Zoe said quietly. "Men like you decide what evidence gets believed." Adrian stepped closer to the bars. "The court will transfer her to county custody in the morning. It is safer for everyone." Zoe saw the flash of satisfaction in his eyes. He wanted her gone before she could speak publicly. Matteo turned away first. He did not promise to help. He did not ask whether she was safe. He simply left. Hours later, Detective Quinn returned alone. Her expression had changed. "I reviewed the footage again," she said. Zoe stood. "The emergency lights are on too soon," Quinn continued. "You were right. It has been edited. Then release me. I can't. The knife still has your apparent trace evidence. The note still connects you to the blackout, and the court has already scheduled your hearing." Quinn hesitated, then lowered her voice. "Your charcoal, what brand do you use?" "Soft vine charcoal. Gray-black. It breaks easily. The residue on the knife is compressed carbon black, industrial grade." Zoe exhaled. It was not enough to clear her, not yet, but it was enough to prove someone had copied the surface of her work without understanding it. As Quinn turned to leave, a paper slipped beneath the cell door. Zoe picked it up. It was the small drawing she had given Officer Bennett. On the back, someone had written 4 words in trembling blue ink. "Vale has the wolf ring." Then, from somewhere at the far end of the corridor, a man screamed, and the lights went out again. The emergency lights flickered on 30 seconds later. Zoe stood at the bars, trying to see down the corridor. 2 deputies rushed past her cell. One shouted for medical assistance. Another yelled that Officer Bennett had been found unconscious near the transport stairwell. "Is he alive?" Zoe called. No one answered. The paper in her hand shook. "Vale has the wolf ring." It was not proof, not the kind a court would accept. But it was enough to make Zoe understand why Adrian had looked so calm all day. He had not merely arranged a murder. He had built a system in which every person who could expose him became either frightened, discredited, or silent. Upstairs, Matteo Rinaldi stood in a private courthouse conference room while Adrian spoke to 3 attorneys. "Bennett may have attacked Zoe's transport officer," Adrian said. "The detective believes he was trying to help her escape." Matteo's eyes narrowed. "Detective Quinn said that? She will, once she sees the evidence." Adrian placed a folder on the table. Inside was a typed report claiming Bennett had accessed restricted cameras after the murder. Another page showed his fingerprint on Zoe's discarded charcoal wrapper. Matteo read it without touching the paper. Something was wrong. Adrian had always brought him facts after they were confirmed. Today, he kept arriving with conclusions before anyone else had time to investigate. "Where is Bennett now?" Matteo asked. "In the hospital wing." "And who gave you these reports?" "The court administrator." "Who told you he was in the hospital wing?" Adrian paused. Only for a moment, but it was long enough. Matteo looked at him. Adrian's expression smoothed itself back into place. "I have people in the building." "Yes," Matteo said. "You do." An hour later, Matteo met Detective Quinn in the evidence office. She had 3 screens open in front of her: the altered security video, the building power log, and the access record for the courthouse archive. "The video was cut," Quinn said. "Someone inserted 4 seconds from a previous hearing. That puts Zoe near the witness stand after the emergency lights came on. Can you prove it?" "I can prove the video metadata was rewritten through an administrator terminal." Matteo looked at the access list. "Adrian Vale." Quinn continued. His credential entered the archive at 8:46 this morning, 13 minutes before the blackout. The system says he accessed case scheduling records, but the archive terminal is on the floor directly above the electrical control room. The power failure started there. Matteo remembered Zoe's in the cell. Men like you decide what evidence gets believed. He had hated the accusation because it was true. There was one more problem. Adrian's access alone would not clear Zoe. A clever lawyer could argue he had entered the archive for legitimate work. Matteo needed proof that Adrian knew what no innocent man could know, so he gave Adrian a lie. Through a lawyer Matteo trusted, he sent word that Officer Bennett had regained consciousness and identified the false court officer. Adrian called within 4 minutes. "Where are they holding Bennett?" he asked. Matteo let the silence stretch. "Why would you need to know?" Adrian's voice tightened. "Because if he is confused, he could damage the case against Zoe. He has not said Zoe's name." Another pause. Then Adrian ended the call. Matteo stared at the dead screen. The trap had worked, but not enough. Adrian still had the courthouse, the judge's trust, and a transfer order that would move Zoe to county jail at 8 in the morning. Once she left Belmont, the evidence could disappear into procedure. Matteo went downstairs alone. When Zoe saw him outside her cell, she did not stand. "You came to watch the transfer?" she asked. "No." He unlocked the interview room beside the holding area, then asked the deputy to move her inside. Zoe entered cautiously, her wrists cuffed in front of her. Matteo placed the original drawing on the table. Her eyes widened. "I found it in the evidence property bag," he said. "Quinn did not log it." "You took it. I protected it. That is not the same as protecting me." "No," Matteo said. "It isn't." He set a second file beside the drawing. The altered video report, the archive access record, and Adrian's call log. "I was wrong," he said, "about you, about him, about what I allowed to happen." Zoe looked at the evidence but did not touch it. "What do you want from me?" Matteo met her gaze. "The truth," he said, "and this time you decide how we use it." Zoe did not answer Matteo immediately. The interview room was barely larger than the cell. One metal table, 3 chairs, a camera in the corner. The original drawing between them like a third person who trusted neither of them. "You want the truth?" she said. "Then start by taking off the cuffs." Matteo looked toward the deputy outside the door. "They come off," he said. The deputy hesitated. "Mr. Rinaldi, she is still—" "Not to me." The cuffs were removed. Zoe rubbed her wrists, then pulled the small drawing from her pocket and placed it beside the original. "Officer Bennett wrote this before he was attacked," she said. "Adrian has the wolf ring." Matteo studied the words. "He was found unconscious," he said. "He's alive. Detective Quinn has him under guard at the hospital." "Good. Then Adrian failed." Matteo's eyes lifted to hers. Zoe leaned forward. "Adrian needs me moved before tomorrow morning because he thinks I can identify him publicly. He also believes I know where Miles Kerr hid the evidence that got him killed. Do you?" "No." The answer landed cleanly. "But Adrian does not know that," she continued. "And people like him do not wait for proof when fear can do the work." Matteo looked at the door, then back at her. "What are you proposing? A trap?" He almost smiled, but there was no arrogance in it, only surprise. Zoe pointed to the original sketch. "I will make a second drawing, not a copy. Something that looks unfinished enough to make Adrian believe I saw more than I did. You are still in custody. How will he see it? He has people inside the courthouse, that is the point." Detective Quinn entered before Matteo could answer. She carried a thin evidence folder and a portable recorder. "The hospital officer is conscious," she said. "Bennett says he saw Adrian Vale in the electrical room 10 minutes before the blackout. He did not see the murder, but he saw Vale hand a court uniform to someone he had never met." "Can he testify?" Zoe asked. "Not tomorrow. He has a concussion and a fractured jaw." "Then Adrian will say he is confused." Quinn nodded grimly. Zoe looked at Matteo. "The drawing has to force Adrian into proving what he already did." Over the next hour, Zoe worked with a pencil Quinn provided. She drew the false court officer again. This time she added a detail that did not exist, a thin chain around the killer's neck attached to a small steel key. Then she wrote one line beneath the sketch. "Archive Locker 14. It was a lie. There was no Locker 14 in the courthouse archive. But Adrian had accessed the archive before the blackout. He would know that. And if he believed Zoe had hidden a record there, he would have to send someone to retrieve it. Or go himself." Matteo watched her work. "You are putting yourself in his path again," he said. "I was already in his path. I just didn't know his name." The words made him look away. Quinn arranged for the fake drawing to be placed in Zoe's evidence file, where an internal clerk would accidentally mention it near Adrian's office. Meanwhile, a judge approved a limited warrant to preserve the courthouse archive access logs, the backup power controller, and Adrian's official communications. Everything had to happen before Zoe's public transfer hearing at 8. It could not be canceled. Too many reporters had already arrived. Too many officials wanted to prove the courthouse was still functioning. At 1:13 a.m., the bait moved. A guard came to Zoe's cell carrying a blanket and a paper cup of water. She recognized him at once, not from the courtroom, from the reflection, the hard jaw, the scarred thumb, and on his right hand, hidden beneath a plain gold band, was the faint outline of a wolf's head ring. He set the water down. Then he bent close to the bars. "Mr. Vale says you should give him the real drawing," he whispered. Zoe looked at him without blinking. "And if I don't?" The man's smile was small and cold. "Then you won't make it to the morning." Zoe looked at the man outside her cell. He wore a courthouse guard's uniform, but his shoulders were too broad for the shirt, and his shoes were too clean for a night shift. The wolf ring sat hidden beneath the plain gold band on his right hand. The killer had come back for the drawing himself. That meant Adrian trusted no one else with the final step. Zoe lowered her eyes as if fear had finally reached her. "The drawing is not here," she whispered. The man leaned closer. "Where is it?" "In the archive." "Locker 14? She let herself hesitate. Then she nodded. The man's expression changed. Victory. Quick and hungry. "Who else knows?" "Only Adrian," Zoe said. It was the only name she gave him. The killer moved away from the cell at once. Less than a minute later, the corridor lights flickered again. A deputy shouted from the far end of the holding area, and the man vanished through the security door. Zoe sat on the cot, her hands cold. Inside the courthouse control room, Detective Quinn listened through the recording device hidden behind the cell's vent. The warrant covered any conversation concerning the witness murder. Every word had been captured. "Mr. Vale says you should give him the real drawing. Only Adrian." Mateo stood beside Quinn, his jaw tight. "He will go to the archive," Quinn said. "He will find nothing," Mateo replied, "which means he may destroy the backup access logs. And we will have him on camera." At 2:06 a.m., Adrian Vale entered the courthouse archive using his own credential. He did not know that the usual security cameras had been replaced by evidence technicians 2 hours earlier. He did not know that Locker 14 did not exist. He did not know that every minute he spent searching made his careful alibi thinner. When he opened the electrical control cabinet beside the archive terminal, Mateo understood the rest. Adrian had hidden a small flash drive inside the panel. The drive contained the original video file from the courtroom, the unedited version. It showed the emergency lights still dark while the false guard moved toward Miles Kerr. It showed Adrian standing at the side entrance, not at the defense table where he claimed to be. But Adrian did not get to remove it. Detectives entered before he could close the panel. At first, he looked almost amused. "You have no right to search my office," he said. "This is not your office," Quinn replied. Then she held up the warrant. By sunrise, Adrian's calm had begun to crack. At 8 o'clock, Belmont Courthouse opened its public hearing on Zoe Hart's transfer to county jail. Reporters packed the gallery. Court employees filled the back rows. Mateo sat in the public section instead of beside Adrian's empty defense chair. Zoe entered in handcuffs. The room turned to look at her. For a moment it felt like the first courtroom again. Too many faces. Too many people ready to believe a story that made her convenient to blame. Then Adrian was brought through a side entrance. Not in cuffs, not yet. His attorneys argued that the recordings were misleading, that the archive access was part of his legal work, that the flash drive could have been planted by anyone. Adrian looked directly at Zoe. "You are talented," he said softly enough that only she could hear. "But talent is not evidence." The judge called the hearing to order. Detective Quinn took the stand first. She described the altered footage, the industrial carbon black on the knife, the access logs, the recording from Zoe's cell. Then Mateo stood. The courtroom became still. "I believe the evidence placed in front of me," he said. "I used my influence to abandon Zoe Hart when she needed fairness. I will not repeat that mistake." Adrian's attorney objected. The judge overruled him. Finally, Zoe was asked to present her drawing. Her hands were free now. She stepped to the display board and placed the original sketch beside the enlarged image of the false court officer from the recovered video. The courtroom could see the scarred thumb, the wolf ring, the shape of the jaw. Zoe picked up her charcoal pencil. "I could not see his whole face in the reflection," she said, "but I saw enough to understand how he stood, how he turned, which hand he used." She drew the final missing line, the angle of the man's left eye, the scar beside his hairline. The face became complete. A bailiff in the gallery gasped. "It's him," he said. Every eye turned toward Adrian. His hand rose instinctively to cover the scar near his temple. Then, in a single movement, he pulled the plain gold ring from his finger. The wolf ring beneath it flashed in the courtroom lights. No one needed Zoe to explain what that meant. Adrian Vale had just named the killer himself. Adrian Vale was arrested before noon. The recovered video, the archive flash drive, the altered access logs, and the recording from Zoe's cell gave prosecutors more than suspicion. They had a timeline, a motive, a method, and a trail Adrian had created because he believed everyone around him would keep protecting his reputation. Officer Bennett survived. His testimony confirmed what Zoe's drawing had begun. Miles Kerr had found records proving Adrian had been selling information from both sides of the law. City investigators, Rinaldi shipping routes, protected witness locations. Kerr had planned to reveal the full network in court. Adrian had killed him to keep the records buried. Zoe was cleared of every accusation before the day ended. Still, being cleared was not the same as being restored. 3 weeks later, she returned to Belmont Courthouse for the first time. The same brass nameplate gleamed near the bailiff's desk. The same witness stand sat beneath the tall windows, but the courtroom felt different now. Less like a place that had turned against her, more like a place forced to remember what it had done. A small gathering waited outside the courtroom doors. Detective Quinn, Officer Bennett, his jaw still healing, reporters, court employees, and Matteo Rinaldi. He stood before them without his lawyers or security team. Zoe stopped several feet away. Matteo spoke clearly enough for everyone to hear. Zohart was falsely accused because people in power accepted a convenient lie. I was one of those people. No excuses followed. No mention of loyalty, no claim that he had been manipulated. I used my influence to make her isolation easier. I failed to give her the dignity of being heard. For that, I am sorry. The hallway was silent. Matteo continued. The Rinaldi Foundation will fund an independent court recording and witness protection program. It will be supervised by a public board, not by me. Zoe has reviewed the terms with her attorney. Quinn handed Zoe a folder. Inside was a contract for a new project. Courtroom artist working with legal advocates to preserve visual evidence, document misconduct, and protect witnesses whose stories might otherwise disappear. Zoe read every page. No hidden clauses, no ownership of her work, no obligation to Matteo. She closed the folder. I'll lead the program, she said. Matteo nodded once. You should, but I am not doing it for you. I know. For the first time, Zoe believed that he did. Later that evening, she left the courthouse carrying her sketchbook under one arm. The city had turned gold beneath the setting sun. Across the street, Matteo waited beside a quiet restaurant with no guards in sight. He did not approach her. He waited. Zoe looked at the empty chair across from him through the window, a seat beside the truth, not below power, not inside someone else's story. Beside it, she crossed the street. You still owe me dinner, she said. Matteo's expression softened. I do. Zoe sat down across from him, and this time, when he listened, he did not look away.